Good morning to everyone and welcome to this second lot of webinars on the New South Wales JobSaver Scheme. Obviously, we're going to have an update today from the Premier about what the lockdown will look like over the next 4 weeks. But this webinar today will cover off on what we know about the JobSaver Scheme so far. And obviously this is changing day to day. At the moment, we are not entirely sure about the exact process that Service New South Wales is going to take to, for example, pay this out, the regularity that it's going to pay it out on, and things like that. That's still being worked out by the New South Wales government, and the guidance that we have on it that's been published on the website is a little bit different to the practical experience that people are having as you would, if you've applied for it, as you would probably know. Just some housekeeping on the webinar. If you've got any questions, comments, etc., please type them in the chat module and type the message there. Obviously, this is a public forum or a somewhat public forum, so please keep your questions and messages sort of generic in nature and don't give away specific business experience or specific employee names or things like that. We'll endeavour to get to all questions by the end of the webinar. And obviously we have the Premier's update at 11 o'clock. We also understand there's some gold medal races in swimming coming up at just after 11 o'clock. So we want to be able to wrap that up so that people can, if they want to, watch Gladys, and if they don't want to, can switch to the Olympics to watch something a little bit more uplifting and positive. So I'll hand over to Alison, and of course Dean is the first person to comment, as I thought he would be. Alison, take it away.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, so I'm assuming probably a lot of you might have had a look at the Service New South Wales website and the guidelines. The grant or the money we're talking about today is called the JobSaver payment. So it starts from this week. It's designed to cover not just salaries and wages, but also other business expenses such as utilities, financial, legal, other advice, marketing, perishable goods, other business costs, materials and things like that you've got. So it's not specifically limited to just paying out your salaries and wages, which is what JobKeeper used to be. So this payment will be based on your last BAS that you lodged before the 26th of June. So for most people, that's going to be either their March 2021 BAS or their April or May 2021 activity statement. And it's going to be based on the wage figure that you had in there. We understand it's going to be a payment of 40% of your weekly payroll. So if you're lodging quarterly or monthly, presumably they'll divide that by the number of weeks. And it's going to be a minimum payment of $1,500 up to a maximum of $10,000 per week. When I've done my husband's business online, he's always my test case bunny. And when I went through the process, the actual logging in, linking the business wasn't too bad. The questions, though, when you start to get to documents and things that you've got to upload, you'll need to upload your business activity statement for that period that you're reporting the wages on. You need to upload probably the businesses, so it's either the individuals or the entities, either 2020 tax return to prove the turnover thresholds, and possibly the notice of assessment if you're an individual. My husband's a sole trader, so he also had to lodge a letter saying that he was eligible for it in general, and that he was the authorised representative of that entity. So be prepared with those documents when you sit down to do this process, because you're going to have them on hand. You may also need to lodge a letter saying that you meet the 30%, minimum 30% drop in turnover for the prior period dates. I note that if you have already done the Service New South Wales business grant application and submitted that letter, you don't need to lodge that letter again. It'll be the same letter. However, I would have that letter on hand in case you need to upload it again in a separate application.
And we just have just a brief clarification there, just in case someone missed that. So it's the most recent activity statement that you lodged before the 26th of June. So if you're on a quarterly basis, you would have lodged your March BAS before the 26th of June. So it's that one that you need to base your payroll off of. If you're on a monthly business activity statement, then hopefully you would have lodged your May activity statement before the 26th of June. So it's that one that it gets based off of. Either that or it'll be your April one. So if you're on quarterly, it'll be your March BAS. If you're on monthly, then it will be either your April or May BAS.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Just a quick update about eligibility for JobSaver. So this is a separate grant with separate eligibility entitlements to the business grants. If you qualify for the business grants, you will qualify for this automatically. But if you didn't for some reason, and some businesses didn't qualify for the business grant because they didn't hit that minimum 30% drop in turnover, then you need to work out what your drop in turnover has been, and it must be more than 30%. And you work out that drop in turnover for the period between the 26th of June and the 17th of July. However, given that this JobSaver is going into an extended period, it will be a longer period in terms of eligibility as well. There's a couple of other specific things that you need to have a think about when you're doing this, because they will ask you to say online, tick a box that you are eligible for this payment. And specifically, it's that you're going, for employing businesses, that you're going to maintain your employee headcount on the 13th of July 2021 in order to get the JobSaver payments. And if you're a non-employing business, so if you're a sole trader, that you are the only or the primary source of income for that particular person. So if you've got another job somewhere, obviously that you can't qualify for this one as well. So in terms of maintaining your employee headcount, you don't have to keep paying them. You do need to maintain the relationship between you. So you can't, if you terminate someone, then obviously you're not maintaining them. However, if they voluntarily resign, then that's okay. That's not your fault. There are some more details on the website about what that looks like. And if you've got any questions, I suggest you give your client manager a call or one of the directors, and we can kind of talk through what the situation is. If you're not paying your staff, though, they are eligible for the disaster payments, which are $600 a week or $375, depending on how many hours they've lost. So you don't need to use this JobSaver money towards paying their wages if you don't want to. They can go on to that other payment system. That kind of covers a lot of the overview of the situation. In terms of logging on to the Service New South Wales website, I ran through a few things that you're going to need to do. There's no need to do it straight away. You've got time to do this. And I know myself and several clients over the last week or so have had lots of problems logging in, or they've got 3/4 of the way through the process and then the system's dropped out. So if you are a person that wants to only sit down and do it once, I'd suggest you wait for maybe another week or so when it's maybe not so busy. And we're having trouble getting anyone on the phone. I've lodged several calls regarding different situations with clients and had no return phone calls whatsoever. So it's a bit difficult for us to get more specific information at this stage. But we do have a deadline that runs out to September, and I think, I read somewhere, I think October for this JobSaver payment as well. So plenty of time. Obviously, if you register in a week or 2 or 3 weeks, they will backdate payments back to when it started. So you won't miss out by lodging it in a later time frame. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember that within Service New South Wales, they're not used to dealing with business activity statements and IASs and tax returns and things like that. So part of the reason why they're doing what they're doing and saying we need a tax return, we need a BAS, it's so that for the cookie cutter approach that they're doing to get this money out and to assess quickly, so that everything looks the same to them. So when you're lodging stuff with them, when you're submitting stuff to Service New South Wales, just make sure that you're giving them exactly what they wanted in the guidelines. Because, as I said, this is very much a cookie cutter approach. We're dealing with a government agency that doesn't normally deal with this kind of thing. And so anything outside of the norms of exactly what they're wanting will result in a delayed application or potentially a rejected one. So I guess that's important to keep in the back of your mind. This is not the ATO. This is not an agency with the ATO's resources and systems in place. This is a New South Wales government agency.
Yep. I would suggest that if you do your application and you don't specifically feel like you're ticking every box easily on that application, it might fail. If it fails, I have no idea how long that turnaround is going to be before they come back to you, or you need to submit more information. So, and at this stage, I haven't had any applications rejected to tell you what the process will be in terms of resubmitting information.
We've got another question in there about what happens if your turnover hasn't declined yet, but it will decrease over the next 4 weeks. If your turnover hasn't met that test yet, but it will in the next 4 weeks, then what we would say is keep monitoring, and as soon as your turnover does meet that test, lodge your application. So get everything ready to lodge the application. And as soon as your turnover reaches that level, lodge the application, because obviously while your turnover hasn't reached a 30% decline yet, as soon as it does, you're then able to access these payments. So it's simply a matter of making sure that as soon as you do get that 30% decline, hopefully you won't, but if you do get that 30% decline, then you're immediately ready to lodge.
I think I may have put a little bit of cat among the pigeons in terms of earlier saying BAS or IAS. I'm just looking specifically at guidelines now, and they do refer to BAS rather than IAS. So if you want to be quite safe about what your payroll is, and assuming your payroll is reasonably consistent, probably everyone should lodge their March BAS, because that'll make it easier with Service New South Wales.
And so a few questions coming in. So in terms of the, I was down 30% for the first period. There'll be an increase in March. So what we would say to, again, if your turnover isn't down yet, as soon as it does turn down, then you are eligible for the payment. Again, the test period is against 2019. We assume that once Gladys has announced the extension of the lockdown, then those test periods will also be extended to match the lockdown period. So it'll be a 2-week period somewhere in the mix of the 2021 lockdown when compared to 2019. So again, this is something that's a bit of a moving feast at the moment as the New South Wales government changes its guidelines. So these guidelines will change.
Yeah. There's a question there about can you apply if you're not registered for GST? One of the tests in order to get this is that you must have a turnover over $75,000. So if you're not registered for GST, possibly it's because your turnover is less. In that case, you actually probably qualify for the New South Wales micro grant. So I'd probably have a look at that one first. I can't quite answer, are you eligible without being registered for GST, but I'm having a look for that at the moment.
Yeah. Question on sole traders. So in terms of utilisation of the grant needs to, both the JobSaver and the New South Wales Business Grant needs to be used to cover business costs. And the examples they're giving are salaries and wages, financial advice, utilities, rent, marketing and communications, or perishable goods. So that probably doesn't cover paying off the ATO or paying your loans or something like that. It covers actually keeping the business sort of open, if you like, in a we can serve customers sense as opposed to a financial sense, which doesn't make sense, I get, but that's the criteria that the New South Wales government is putting on this.
Another question about if you had a company that didn't exist in 2019, what comparison period would you use? I have 2 or 3 clients in that situation that I'm trying to get clarification on that for, and I can't. I'm telling them to wait at this stage until we can actually speak to Service New South Wales and see what they'll accept, because I'm a bit loath to put in an application, to put in answers with an accountant's letter stating different periods until I understand what they want. But I am telling my clients to run me a series of reports for 2-week periods from when their business did start. So obviously, if you're a startup business and your turnover was low and now it's, fully high, that's not an ideal situation. I'm also telling, like, the other periods I'm looking at are the similar 2-week period in 2020, and also looking at maybe a 2-week period once a month for the last 6 months, so that they can demonstrate what their turnover has been in a non-COVID shutdown timeframe. But I think for those people, it's probably better to wait until we get a better answer out of what are they after. There's another question. Are you required to pay your employees if they're receiving the $600 government support? No, you're not. So if your business has no cash flow to pay them and they're on that government support, then no, you don't need to use JobSaver to pay them.
Another question. So an employing business can apply for JobSaver even if the staff are receiving disaster payments. That's correct. Is it true if a director is receiving a disaster payment, the company cannot apply for JobSaver? Now, the exact wording in the rules are that non-employing businesses are not eligible for JobSaver if individuals associated with and deriving income from the business receive a disaster payment. Now, that's a non-employing business. If you're an employing business, then I would say the same rules would apply that Alison has just said. So if you're a non-employing business and you're getting the disaster relief payment from the Commonwealth, then you can't get JobSaver. If you are an employing business with people who are getting a JobSaver payment, then yes, you can still get this. Sorry, the disaster payment, you can still get the JobSaver payment.
Yeah. So basically, in that situation, you may have been getting the disaster payment for yourself. Let's say you're an employee of your business. If you're a sole trader. If you're a sole trader and you've been getting the disaster payment, you need to turn it off. And you need to turn it off before the 18th of July. This JobSaver starts from the 18th of July, so you cannot get both. So turn off the disaster payment and get the $1,000 a week sole trader JobSaver payment.
Can the included rent be to related entities? Yes. Again, payment of rent even to a related entity is in the normal course of your business. So that would be covered by the New South Wales grant.
There's a question about a business being restructured, so one entity changing to another entity. I think that goes back to my earlier question, similar to if you had just started your business. When we had the applications for JobKeeper, so back in our first round of lockdowns, in that situation where you had changed entities, it was treated as a new business. So they didn't count what the previous turnover amounts had been. So I think it's going to be similar. I think you'll just have to wait and see what guideline, what information Service New South Wales is going to want for a new business.
As a contracted dentist sole trader, can you use the JobSaver to pay for the facility charge paid to the principal dentist? The answer to that would be yes. That would be covered under the other business costs part of the funding grant, and that would be a eligible cost because you're required to pay that as part of your business.
The next question is about keeping the engagement with your staff. And the question is, does the JobSaver payments include casual staff? Yes, it does. If you've got a casual staff, again, that I said, like as I mentioned earlier, if they voluntarily leave, not your problem. So if you've got casual staff and they're not completely engaged, that's fine. But if you terminate a casual staff member, then that will affect your eligibility. So don't sack anyone. But you don't have to pay them. Equally, they can qualify for the disaster payments.
Yeah, and I think that covers off the next question. What if the staff member gave notice before lockdown and leaves after this JobSaver period headcount date? So if people are leaving the business, then you would not be able to claim JobSaver for that particular person. Now, obviously, the funding for JobSaver is based on a March BAS, which they would still be included in, but you would need to be careful that you're not claiming them. Presumably, you've replaced them with another member of staff or something like that anyway. Yep. Or maybe they were just totally not part of the business and you haven't replaced them with a member of staff. But either way, it would be important not to claim for them. I would say although there's no clarity on this rule in the guidelines, it
does actually mention that if your staff numbers have decreased from that activity statement number that you had in, then you should declare that to Service New South Wales. However, in the process that I've been through, there is no way to do that. So I would just lodge as it is per the system, making note that you might need to pay them an amount back in some point in the future.
Yeah, as we said, this is a bit of a moving feast still. And so we're not sure how Service New South Wales is actually going to come along and allow you to declare something. But follow the guidelines as they exist now. And if your headcount has decreased since March, you should just stand by to pay it back.
Yep. Okay, a question: a sole trader dentist with an ABN, do you register for JobSaver or the New South Wales grant? I would register for both. You will be eligible for both. So the New South Wales business grant is is a lump sum payment based on the drop in turnover between the 26th of June and the 17th of July, any 2-week period between those dates, and that'll give you a lump sum payment. The JobSaver is to provide ongoing support for however long the New South Wales government keeps us in lockdown for, based on their specific definitions, and it'll be a weekly payment based on your wages. So apply for both.
Yeah.
I would probably, if you qualify for both, like if your 30% turnover drop happens before the 17th of July and you're eligible for the business grant, I would apply for that first. Because a lot of the information you'll need for the JobSaver application is included in that first grant. So you'll have it all to hand.
It's also important to note that the business grant, so the first one, is intended to cover weeks 1 to 3 of lockdown, and JobSaver is intended to cover weeks 4 onwards. So as Alison said, apply for both because you might be eligible for both, and they both cover different periods of the lockdown.
The next question: if a staff member is stood down claiming disaster payments, do they still claim on JobSaver? So the employees do not claim JobSaver. The ABN business claims JobSaver. So if the employee is on disaster payments, it's because they've applied themselves. So they're two totally separate programs, and two different people are applying for them. Does JobSaver cover a contractor who works exclusively for the company? So if you've got a contractor working for you, presumably they have their own ABN number, and they would apply for JobSaver or business grant themselves. So the company or the business does not need to pay them, and they need to make their own applications. Okay.
Include turnover from overseas connected entities, e.g. parent entity of reference.
Yeah. Scott? I'll read the question. So does the aggregated turnover amount include turnover for overseas connected entities, e.g. overseas parent entity. I noted that reference national aggregated turnover in the eligibility criteria. I think no, I think it's Australian income, but watch this space.
At the moment, the aggregated turnover would tend to exclude overseas entities and just count Australian entities, unless you're an entity which is specifically excluded. So, for example, if you're owned by a government agency or local government body, or owned by a sovereign entity or something like that, then you're automatically excluded.
Actually, I think we're right. So back in that eligibility criteria, specifically they're saying they had a national aggregated turnover between 75 and 50 million. So national income.
Yeah. So you would exclude the foreign entities out of that, as I said, unless you're on the ineligible business list, i.e. you're owned by a government agency or a sovereign wealth fund or something like that. Then you're automatically out. Other than that, you would exclude the turnover of international non-Australian entities and just go aggregated turnover inside Australia.
Okay, a question about businesses with multiple entities and therefore multiple ABNs. So yes, you will, where you have multiple ABNs, you would apply for each entity separately. So you need to have a think about, does each entity meet the eligibility criteria? We have quite a few clients where they are companies and trusts or sole traders and trusts, and we are still a little bit in limbo in terms of the trust turnover if that predominantly comes from the company or the sole trader. So I'm telling those clients at this stage to wait till I have better definition, better understanding of what their turnover drops will be. But yes, it is based on an ABN number. So if you have multiple entities, you need to assess each entity and then you can lodge for them. All right, I think we've got to the end of our questions.
Is that all the questions? Does anybody else have any questions that they want to ask? Obviously, you would be able to give your relevant partner or manager a call and ask them any questions that that you haven't asked here. But if no one else has any questions, then
just one more.
To replace. The answer to that, Jeffrey, is no. The grant was a once-off grant. So for weeks 1 to 3, JobSaver is the one from weeks 4 through to whenever the lockdown ends.
Yep. Another question, somebody is saying, can you claim for the disaster payment and the JobSaver? No, it's an either or. So some people that did not meet the 30% turnover drop would not have been eligible for the lump sum grants initially for weeks 1 to 3. So they may have applied for the disaster payments. If you did that, or if they did that, then you need to turn it off, because if you apply for the disaster payments, you will not be eligible for JobSaver.
In terms of legislating, no idea. In order to legislate, you'd need to have Parliament sitting. For Parliament to sit, I think they need to lift the lockdown. Yes,
no, that's not going to happen. Yeah,
it's legislation by media release at the present.
Yeah, so and that's very much where we're struggling with it, a lot of it, because it's a bit similar to when JobKeeper first came out. We used to hear about things on the the 6 o'clock news. We'd all then scramble and read all the news releases and the Treasury updates and things like that. That's very much what's happening this go round too. Yeah. So
and then 48 hours they changed. 48 hours later they changed.
That's right. Change the dates, change the definitions. So I really do think that Service New South Wales, while they're doing a great job, is struggling in terms of getting their labour force around this, because anecdotally I've heard that a whole lot of different departments, health and various other things, health, education, etc., have had a whole lot of their staff pulled in to start answering phone calls on this, and it's all new for them. They've never done this before. As Scott said before, they've never had to deal with a BAS or a a notice of assessment or anything like that before. So yeah, this is new for them. there's no, the deadlines are September and October, so we've got a couple more months before we've really got to worry about getting things lodged. And I think in the next couple of weeks, we will get a lot more clarity as people's applications go through. And if things get rejected, we'll have, a better idea of what we need to submit for unusual situations.
Yeah. Can you turn off the disaster payment and then be eligible for the JobSaver? Yes. Speak to your partner or manager about that, because the JobSaver payment, even for non-employing entities, is bigger than the Commonwealth disaster payment. So it's well worthwhile turning it off if you can and are eligible for the New South Wales scheme. How do they calculate the business grant? What amount is expected? So business grant is a tiered one. So it depends on your level of turnover decline. So there's a band between 30 and 50%, a band between 50 and 75%, and a band of 75% and above. And from memory, it's what, 30 to 50% decline is 7.5%.
So if you drop more than 30%, you get 7.5. If you drop more than 50%, you get 10.5, and if you drop more than 70, you get 15,000. So I think a lot of businesses, the government, they've released their, what do they call them? Their special. I'm struggling to think of it. What are they called? Like the businesses that were impacted initially. So health and, a lot of businesses from the 26th of June were shut down very quickly. Those high impact businesses probably started to feel a drop almost straight away. Whether you were partly shut down, fully shut down is going to depend on how much that drop is. But once we hit the 18th, and we really had, week 4, we had, Sydney-wide lockdowns, construction went into lockdown, things like that. A lot more, that second tier of lockdown, a lot more businesses got affected. So those second tiers may not be eligible if you were still working for those first 3 weeks. And then that's why JobSaver has now kicked in to give you a weekly ongoing payment.
Yeah. And just to clarify the questions there, so business grant applies for lockdown weeks 1 to 3, correct? And then JobSaver applies from week 4 onwards. So there's different drop dead dates by which you need to apply. So the business grant is, Alison, somewhere in September. You need to have your.
I think it's the 13th.
Yeah, something like that in September. You need to have your application in for the business grant for weeks 1 to 3. For JobSaver, at the moment, the deadline is somewhere in October, but let's see what they do to push that out.
We're not locked down in October still.
Yeah, correct. So I'd say that they'll have more time to lodge that one the further this lockdown goes out, but at the moment it's set for mid-October for JobSaver applications.
Yeah.
So you've got time to do both.
A question about if you have business operations in other states, you're only applying for your New South Wales payment. So this is a state-based payment. So you're really only looking at, while it was annual turnover, it's your staff in New South Wales that you're looking at. So you're going to submit a BAS. I'm pretty sure, and I really think, don't trust me on this one, but I'm pretty sure I read that you need to allocate on your application the staff and the wages that are specifically for New South Wales.
Yes.
So if your BAS is for multiple, like a business with entities in different states, I don't know how you're going to submit that online at this stage, because you're going to have to submit a secondary document explaining that my BAS is this much for wages, but here's the wages for each state.
Yeah. Because New South Wales grant is only covering New South Wales-based employees. Yeah. With the COVID saver and business grants, what time frame do you need to show proof of when you are spending this money? So there's, at the moment we don't have an answer to that question, purely because we don't know when the lockdown is going to end. So both are intended to cover business expenses during the lockdown periods for impacted businesses. So we assume that you've got to spend the money over the lockdown periods, but there's no definitive answer on that. But we would expect that the New South Wales government, when they come to audit this, will audit your business expenses and say, okay, these were your business expenses over the period. This is what you received in JobSaver and business grant. Yes, you've spent all of this over the entirety of the lockdown period.
Yep. A question, is the job in the JobSaver application, there's a question, are the directors getting any other payments? If you say yes, particularly for disaster payments, they decline you. Yes, I think they will decline you, because if you've got a director getting a disaster, in a sole trader application, yes, they would. But I think if you're a company with a director, I think what they're referring to is, are you getting other payments from other sources? I haven't had that question, though, in the one that I did, so I can't specifically answer it. But I think the answer would be yes. If you're getting other payments, I think, yes, they would decline.
If you don't spend all the grant money, there's not a mechanism yet to pay it back. The Service New South Wales would only find out on audit that you hadn't spent it. So at the moment, there's no mechanism to pay overclaimed, if you like, money back. But if you're eligible, you should still claim. And I'm sure that at some point in the future, the New South Wales government will provide a guidance on a mechanism to pay it back. But as you've seen with JobKeeper, the vast majority of JobKeeper payments were actually paid, and people haven't paid them back. The close of business losses due to the first 3 weeks of lockdown will not reflect in the March BAS. It will reflect in June BAS. Can you still apply for the business grant? Yes, you can. The business grant is based on a 2-week turnover test for 2021 versus 2019. Nothing to do with the BAS. So if you're applying for the business grant, then the ATO, not the ATO, Service New South Wales is wanting a BAS in order to prove that you're actually in business, but they're not actually doing anything with that BAS. Again, I go back to, this is a cookie cutter approach. There's lots of people from different New South Wales government departments now sitting in Service New South Wales who have never done this before with a checklist, and they're simply ticking everything off as businesses submit them. So have you submitted this? Yes, tick. You can then go on with your application. So for the business grant, the BAS is kind of irrelevant to that. It just proves that you're in business. For JobSaver, the grant, so for JobSaver, you need to submit March BAS as sort of proof that you were paying wages and what the level of wages were.
That's it, I think.
Did that get through all the questions?
I think we've done all the questions. Yep.
Did anybody have any other questions that they wanted to ask? Again, this is all still being clarified by the New South Wales government as we progress, and we would anticipate, especially with JobSaver, that the deadlines and deadlines for it and the application process for it will be streamlined and changed the longer lockdown goes. So we would expect that over the next 4 or so weeks, as lockdown comes along, that there would be more changes to this program. So stand by for those. Service New South Wales making life easy, but yeah, we would expect there to be more changes to be made to this program as they go along.
Okay, a couple more questions. If you're a sole trader and you're getting paid monthly, but you only had a decline in profit for a 2-week period, how do you report that? I think that's going to be another one of my unknowns. I think while you only get paid monthly, you might need to work out a turnover or a billing amount that you're basing it on weekly, and then look at what the weekly periods are in a couple of months. So, or if in 2019, in that, you can look at the 26th of June to the 17th of July, you got paid in one of those 2-week periods. Hopefully you didn't get paid in the 2021 year. Otherwise, if that didn't work out nicely, I think you're going to need to kind of break it down into weeklies and look at other supporting information, maybe other practice software reports, etc., to come up with, a reasonable amount to compare the two years.
Yeah. And just to clarify again on the turnover tests. So the turnover tests are based on 2 weeks, 2021 versus 2019. So the turnover test isn't actually based on your sales, if you like, on a BAS or anything like that. It's based on a 2-week comparative period for 2021 versus 2019. So as Alison said, at the moment, we don't have any clarity. So if someone's paid monthly, what that looks like, but it needs to be a 2-week turnover period compared to 2019 at the moment. So your sales on the BAS are kind of irrelevant to this. It's more those specific periods that you can demonstrate the 2 weeks. That's what the OSR and Service New South Wales is interested in.
Yep.
What 2 weeks of the year? So there's a period for it that you can pick, and that's changed 2 or 3 times now. That you can pick. So I would speak to your partner and manager at Ecovis about it, and make sure that you're picking the right 2-week period for comparison, because they've moved the dates a couple of times, and some people that we found for weeks 1 and 2 in that 3-week period of the group business grant, they don't qualify, but weeks 2 and 3 they do. So then it's a matter of going back and tracking 2019 performance. So strongly advise you to speak to your relevant partner and manager at Ecovis about that period and about exactly which period is right for your individual circumstances.
Mm-hmm. And then with the JobSaver, if you didn't meet that 30% drop in the first 3 weeks, so from 26 June to 17 July, but you do start to meet it afterwards, you'll need to wait. So we're in week 4 next, week 5 now. So you might need to wait to the end of this week and have a look at what the last couple of weeks are, and see what your turnover drop is before you do your application. Mm-hmm. A question about can you cancel the disaster payment? Yes, you can. I can't tell you how to do that because I haven't applied, but however you applied for Service New South Wales, through Service New South Wales for the disaster payment,
Services Australia.
Oh, Service Australia. I imagine you'll call them, email them and tell them to turn it off.
For the business grant, so the business grant, so if you have, in order to apply for the business grant, you needed to have an aggregated annual turnover between 75,000 and 50 million. Inclusive for the business grant. So if your turnover is below 75,000 for the business grant, at the moment for that first weeks 1 to 3, we don't think that you qualify for that, but, and this is the sort of anchor out to windward, there's going to be a micro business grant, which is going to cover $75,000 and below, that the New South Wales government has announced that there will be one, but has not given us any detail of what it's going to be. So the first business grant for weeks 1 to 3 covers $75,000 and above. The micro business grant, which is still to give us details of, is $75,000 and below. So stand by for more information on that.
Yeah. Another question around the payroll evidence. So providing evidence of your weekly payroll is what submitting that BAS is for. If you're submitting your March BAS and you're a quarterly lodger, it'll have 3 months of wages on there. If you're submitting your March BAS and you're a monthly lodger, it'll just have 1. They will understand that because on your March BAS, it tells you what period that the wage figures are for. So they will base it on that March BAS that you're submitting. Yep. I don't think there's another question about how do they calculate the wages and dividing, weekly, etc. I can't answer it because we don't know. As I said, when I lodged my husband's one, he was a March BAS for a quarter, and the wage, it came back after I'd lodged it and said I was going to get a certain amount, and I couldn't make head nor tail of how they'd worked out that figure. So So I think we just have to wait. I was hoping his one might have actually been processed and I had an answer back before this call, but we haven't had anything back yet. So again, I can only suggest that they'll work out what your weekly wage bill is from those BAS figures, and then you will get 40% of that weekly figure with a minimum 1,500 and a maximum 10,000. Yep. So that's a bit of a wait and see one too. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, everybody. If you've got more questions, I think email us later to your client contact. We are going to put a recording of this up on our webinar. And we have, if for anybody that's interested in the business grants, our previous recording, we did some of those a couple of weeks ago. That's also up on our website, so you could have a look at those as well. Yeah, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned. There's more coming.
Hopefully not lots more lockdown time though.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yep. All right.
Great.
Thanks everybody for coming today. Stay safe.
Thank
See
you,
you later.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.